Hey, how's everybody doing? My name is Casey Bennett. I'm here to present my paper, Evoking an Intentional Stance During Human-Agent Social Interaction for Roman 2021. Thanks for coming to my short little talk here today. I am an associate professor at Hanyang University in Seoul, South Korea. I'm also affiliated with DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States in the Department of Computing. So what are we talking about today? So the paper that we submitted is all about this notion of intentionality, right? So I'm not going to get into it here in the interest of time, but the idea of intentionality is all about agents having their own sort of beliefs and desires and using those to kind of motivate what they do, right? What's interesting is that humans kind of know when they're interacting with humans, but when we interact with artificial agents, we don't assume that they have intentionality. There's something different between them, right? And there's a whole scale of different things in the world that we perceive in different ways, all the way from fully intentional sort of entities like other humans to things that don't have any intentionality, like the thermostat on the wall, and a whole range of things in between, right? What's really interesting is that people can immediately tell the difference between an intentional and non-intentional agent during interaction, right? Like just immediately, they just know. But the question is why, right? Even when we have really sophisticated like robots or artificial agents that look really realistic, people don't perceive them as like real, as intentional agents, right? Even on specific social tasks like facial expression recognition, they often don't perform any better, and sometimes they even perform worse than just very abstract sort of artificial agent or robot designs, right? And so there's an argument to be made that maybe this focus on the appearance of our agents and our robots and focusing on how they appear to behave is actually damaging our progress in robotics and AI, because it's taking energy and effort and money away from focusing on what causes this intentionality to emerge. Why do humans perceive it sometimes and not other times, right? We're kind of creating this misalignment in the expectations, right? Some researchers are even arguing that we may be approaching a social robotics winter similar to AI winners of the past 50 years by setting ourselves up to fail, because people see these really realistic looking robots and artificial agents that then their behavior doesn't line up, right? The appearance is up here, but the behavior is down here. And what we need is a better alignment between the two. There's lots of research into this topic. One area that I've done a lot of work on, and many people have, is the area of robotic faces, and trying to figure out, people look at different things like facial expression recognition or gaze behavior, these other things, but we seem to be missing this notion of social fluidity, right? There's some sort of social fluidity that happens in natural interactions, and we haven't really been able to figure out how to create it yet, right? There's a lot of really interesting recent research too, looking at neural correlates of this sort of intentionality and showing how you can actually see this in the human brain when we interact with other humans versus when we interact with artificial agents. We can see this in socially assisted robots when we look at situated use of robotic pets in people's homes, this notion of social presence. And what seems to be coming out of all of this is that the appearance is not what really matters. It's not the most important thing, but rather it's the perception of social rewards that are related to the social interaction, right? There's these reward mechanisms that need to be triggered, and we're not really doing it, right? And the appearance is not the thing that triggers it, it's the perception, right? And so part of what this paper is about and what we're arguing for is that maybe in order to trigger this intentional stance, this perception of intentionality, maybe what we need to do is focus on creating artificial agents that adopt one about themselves. Maybe the focus needs to be on getting the agent to sort of take an intentional stance about itself, and then other agents like humans will perceive it as intentional. At least that's the idea, right? So we have several areas of research that are focused on trying to work towards this goal. One thing that we're working on is trying to reverse engineer social cognition. So instead of trying to create more human-like artificial agents or robots, what we're actually doing is trying to create less human-like humans. And the idea is if we can figure out how to break the social interaction, then maybe we can use what are those sort of like components of that cause it to break. Maybe we can use those then to reverse engineer how our agents need to actually behave in order to trigger this sort of intentionality, right? Another thing we're looking at is trying to simulate sort of artificial personalities, right? So instead of trying to create personalities, full-blown personalities, what we're focused on is creating these abstract simulations of simple interactions and really focus on creating agents that don't worry about what they're supposed to do. All they worry about is how the world responds to them, right? And so instead of focusing on trying to learn a bunch of action rules about what they do in different situations, they simply say, if I do this, the world responds that way. And then the idea is maybe that can create the building blocks of what we think of as personalities without actually trying to design a personality from the get-go, right? And what we found is that we can do this actually. So we've been able to create agents where the agent programming doesn't change. But if we vary the social environment, we actually end up with agents that have very different behavior, right? And this is all kind of interesting potential, but still a work in progress. Another area similar to this is what we're working on lately is using ecological momentary assessment with social robots. And we're trying to understand in real time how people interact with these robots versus to just using recall methods of what did you do yesterday or what did you do last week. And what we're trying to do is track how these sequences of behaviors unfold over time, and trying to tie these together with people's perceptions of intentionality, right? Because there's a sequential nature of an interaction that's really, really important to creating that sort of social fluidity and creating that sort of idea of social rewards that we think may be linked to intentionality, right? But we first need to figure out how to track this kind of data so that we can then kind of do the modeling to tie it together. We do have some preliminary results that are pretty suggestive of our ability to take sensor data being collected from social robots and then tie that in with EMA data and being able to actually say, hey, these are the kinds of activities that are going on, and then look at how that relates to what the robot was doing at that time and how people are interacting with it and how people are then perceiving the interaction, right? So to sum up in the short amount of time I have, all of this kind of stuff that I was talking about, from the sort of reverse engineering social cognition to these avatars, to the simulating emergent personalities, to the EMA stuff with socially assisted robots, is that one thing we need to do is we need a closer alignment of a couple things. We need a closer alignment between our agent design and the functionality. So what it does versus how it appears. They need to be on the same level. We can't just build androids that behave like cockroaches. That's actually going to prevent us from making progress. And we need to also think about how the human sense of intentionality aligns with the agent sense of intentionality, right? The human's going to have a perception of it, but then how does that relate to when we try to design an agent with a sense of intentionality? We need to make sure those things align. Both of these things align. Couple thoughts here at the end. One thing that we think is that intentionality cannot be designed. Only the conditions within which it might arise emergently can be created. And there needs to be more research then about what those conditions are. So all the stuff I talked about today and the stuff we talk about in the paper is trying to figure out how can we create the conditions in which sort of this intentionality in our artificial agents can emerge without us trying to design it through some predefined goals or prescriptive programming behavior. So if you like to talk, I hope you guys check out my paper. We talk about all this a lot more in detail. And I'd just like here at the end to thank all my collaborators that I work with at Indiana University, in TU Berlin, Germany, and Mississippi State, and Tsukuba, and my students at Hanyang University as well. And so if you want, you can contact me if you have any questions. Otherwise, thank you very much and I hope you have a good day. Thanks.